Hello again, and thanks for watching our program. I'm Harry Greenberger, and I'm the host of this show. Very recently, I was watching a television program which was a celebration of the 50th anniversary of the publication of Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged. Having been a long-time admirer of Ayn Rand and of that book, I thought it would be interesting to have someone on our show who could talk to us on that subject. So I did what all the young people in this country know how to do better than I do. I Googled Ayn Rand / New Orleans, Atlas Shrugged / New Orleans, Objectivism / New Orleans, and whatever I did, I came up with the same name, Dr. Walter Block, who is our guest here today. Joining us on our panel today are two of the NOCHA members whom you have seen in the past, Dave Schultz and Lanny Goldfinch. But I particularly want to welcome Dr. Block to our show, and I'd like to tell you just a little bit about his background. He at this time is a professor at Loyola University here in New Orleans. He got his PhD in economics from Columbia University back in 1972. And going sort of from that date forward, he was assistant professor of economics at Baruch College in New York, assistant professor of economics at Rutgers University in New Jersey, senior economist and director of the Fraser Institute in Vancouver, Canada, associate professor, economics department of the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, professor and chair of the Department of Economics and Finance of the University of Central Arkansas, and from 2001 to the present time, he's professor of economics and holder of the Harold E. Wirth Eminent Scholar Chair in Economics, College of Business Administration, Loyola University in New Orleans. Now, having said all that about you,
you're dyed-in-the-wool intellectual, aren't you?
And it doesn't say here, what your connection might be with Atlas Shrugged and Ayn Rand and Objectivism, but tell us about that.
Well, when I was a senior in Brooklyn College, I'm Jewish, or at least of Jewish parentage. I'm an atheist. I was a left liberal, which is almost a redundancy because all Jewish liberal Brooklynites were left-wingers. And Ayn Rand came to Brooklyn College to lecture, and I came to boo and hiss her because she favored capitalism, and capitalism was evil. Because if you had free enterprise, you'd have starvation, and babies would be dying in the streets, and it would be just horrible. So I came and I booed and hissed, and I didn't get enough booing and hissing because at the end of the lecture, they announced that there would be a luncheon in her honor, and anyone could come, even if you agreed or disagreed. And I came to do some more fighting because I wanted to get her because she was just pure evil. And they were sitting in this long, long table. Ayn Rand was at the head of the table, Nathaniel Brennan, Alan Greenspan, Leonard Peikoff, and all the top Randians. And I was relegated to the foot of the table, and I turned to my neighbor and I said, what is this capitalist crap? It's all wrong, it's evil, it's monstrous, we have to have socialism. And he turned to me and he said, well, I don't really know because I'm new to this too, but the people that do know are at the other end of the table. So I went and I stuck my head between Ayn's and Nathan's, and I said, there's a socialist that wants to debate you, someone on capitalism. And they said, who is it? And I said, it's me. And Nathaniel Brennan was very kind, and he said, okay, I'll come and I'll debate you. I'll come to the other end of the table where there's room. There's no room here, on two conditions. One, that you don't let the conversation lapse after this one luncheon. And two, you read two books, but continue this dialogue until we come to a conclusion one way or the other. And secondly, that you read two books that I'll now recommend to you. And one was Atlas Shrugged, and one was Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. Now, I was a philosophy major up until then, and that turned me around in two ways. I became interested in economics, and I also became a libertarian because I was converted by, I would go to Nathaniel's apartment or Ayn Rand's apartment, and Alan Greenspan was there. This is before he was the head of the Fed. And after 3 or 4 sessions, I became converted to free enterprise and libertarian economics.
And you have not been unconverted since that time?
No, not at all. I read Atlas Shrugged. It's about 1,100 pages, a very small type. I couldn't put it down. It just sort of, it was a very edifying experience. I must have read it just in one weekend, and I've read it every decade since then. So I read it when I was maybe 22 as a senior in college, 32, 42, 52, 62. Every 10 years I read it, I get something new out of it. I think it's the most magnificent book ever written. That is novel anyway. And I'm a big fan of it. I'm not an objectivist, but I certainly am a free market economist.
Well, I do have a question because you mentioned libertarianism, and without the capital L, it just means that people should have the right to live lives as they choose with a minimum amount of government influence, and so long as they're not preventing other people from living their libertarian lives.
I think that's a very good short encapsulated version, libertarianism.
And that is not the same as the philosophy that Ayn Rand produced called Objectivism. What is that difference?
Well, think of a Venn diagram where there's an overlap, and here's Objectivism and here's Libertarianism. They overlap on economics. They both favor laissez-faire capitalism. Now, Objectivism includes a lot of things other than that. For example, they have views on epistemology, metaphysics, aesthetics, logic, all sorts of other things, which don't really interest me that much. I went to the NBI, the Nathaniel Branden Institute seminars, and I sort of was on the periphery of it. I was never in the inner circle because I didn't really like the rest of it. It didn't grab me. I mean, she had this view that Brahms was better than Mozart, and that somehow this was the essence of Objectivism. And I
Well, he is better than Mozart.
No. Mozart is better.
No!
I can prove this.
Wagner's better than Mozart.
No, Mozart is 3.2 times better than. See, I'm 3.2 times better than Brahms by my
Mozart's
calculation.
where I start counting.
Okay.
This is supposed to be a very amiable group.
It is an annual. We're being very annual. Let me ask you this. I read those books because I was in philosophy too back in those days, and I remember when that book first came out. I was still actually in college, and then I went to graduate school here in philosophy at Tulane. I very well remember, and I also remember all the hooplas that developed between the sordid side of Ayn Rand's, what became labeled by many people a cult. You know, and are you ever heard it called a cult, Objectivism?
Well, no, I haven't heard that term, but I do know.
Well, some people, including Nathaniel Branden, when he split with her, that's one of the things that he accused.
There were internal difficulties among that group.
That made Bitter look moral. But her views on ethics, I think, are the ones that I was totally uninterested in the economic side. Laissez-faire, I'm totally laissez-faire about laissez-faire capitalism, but you picked up on that. I was interested in the epistemology side, the philosophical side, and the ethics question. Now, the epistemology, I don't know if you're even familiar with the epistemology of Objectivism, is almost, so common sense realism almost. I mean, basically it says there is a physically real world out there that we perceive. It's very almost naive somehow in its initial presentation. At least this impression I had. I haven't read that. I read the Bible every year, but not found it.
Well, there's a lot of antagonism toward Ayn Rand and her position. Part of it being the book she wrote called The Virtue of Selfishness. And in contemporary society, people don't think selfishness is a virtue. Does that enter into any of your thinking?
Well, Adam Smith had this view, the invisible hand. And in the invisible hand, we're all selfish or self-interested, and we pursue our self-interest. And through the mediation of the free enterprise system, we are led as if by an invisible hand, Adam Smith thought it was the hand of God, to do that which is in the public interest or in the public good. And certainly Ayn Rand would favor the Adam Smith view of the invisible hand, and I certainly do. I think that if we have marketplaces and capitalism and private property, and people are allowed to seek profits, they will therefore pursue the public interest. Let's take an example. We had Katrina, and after Katrina, there were all sorts of shortages of flashlight batteries and orange juice and things like that people needed, and there was price gouging. Prices were rising for gasoline, whatever you really needed in these emergencies. And the people who were engaging in price gouging were doing it out of selfish motivations in order to make profits.
They were capitalist entrepreneurs.
They were capitalist entrepreneurs. And Blanco said that we're going to put these people in jail. They're abominations. They're horrible people because, they're taking advantage of people. But the insight of Adam Smith and Ayn Rand and other advocates of free enterprise, such as myself, is that higher prices have a positive role to play. On the one hand, they have this function of making sure that everyone gets a little bit of the orange juice or the water or whatever you're waiting for. Because if the price is the old price of, say, $1 a quart for whatever it is, then the first guy in line is going to grab a lot of it. But if it's $10, $20, he's going to say, well, maybe I'd better just take a little bit, and that way you leave room for other people. So it has a rationing function. Secondly, higher prices call forth supplies from Kentucky or Massachusetts or California or wherever else, which brings this stuff to New Orleans. So these high prices are a signal. They're like a cry in the wilderness for help. We raise the prices, we're saying, help us. Stuff will come in and we will ration it in a more reasonable way. And this is all the functioning of selfishness working out. And it's certainly, as you can see, in the public good. Whereas Blanco and the people who were against the price gouging were actively, maybe acting out of good motives, but I think economic ignorance. And, what is that? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
That's a saying.
They had good intentions, but they don't know any economics, and they don't realize the virtue of selfishness, if we can get back to your question. And this is a perfect case in point of seeing the benefits, as Ayn Rand brilliantly saw, of free enterprise.
Well, now, you are teaching economics at Loyola University, which is a Jesuit institution, and you said at the opening of this show that you are an atheist. How do you get the Ayn Rand type material into your classes?
Well, in my intro economics courses, I require Atlas Shrugged as one of the readings. That's one way I get it in there. I don't think there's any incompatibility with the Jesuits and being an atheist. I teach economics. I don't teach philosophy or religion, so it really wouldn't be a confrontation. I don't even mention it. I mention it here because we're secular humanists here. We're atheists here. So, and Ayn Rand was certainly an atheist.
Yes,
she was a devout atheist. Actually, I slightly deviate from her in this. While I'm an atheist, I'm sort of a fan of religion.
Explain that.
And the reason I'm a fan of religion is I see the main enemy of humanism, the government. I see the government as evil. And I noticed that in the Soviet Union, they were quite correct in lashing out at two institutions that were in great competition with them. One was the family, and the other was religion. The family, they would try to get kids to tattle on their parents, which is a way of breaking up the family. And certainly their views on religion were very critical. So my thinking here is the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
And the state is the great enemy, and if the state picks the family and religion as its enemy, well, then the family and religion are my friends, and I'm supporters of them, because we are having a struggle over the hearts and minds of the populace. And on the one hand, we have the state, and on the other hand, we have religion. Although in history, the two have not always been opposite, but I see them as opposite because I see religion as a voluntary institution, whereas I see the state as coercive. Here I have some slight differences with Ayn Rand, too. She favored limited government. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I believe that the best government is that government which governs least, and least of all is none. So I see the state as an evil institution.
Dave,
how do you feel about public education?
Oh, public education is the spawn of the devil. I mean, actually, public education is a very anti-Catholic kind of a thing. The way we had The onset of public education was a Protestant attack on Catholics. This was in the late 19th century, 1880 through 1910. That's where public education started. And at that time, you had a lot of immigrants coming from Italy and Ireland and other Catholic, Poland, places like that. And the Protestants said that, these people are a spawn of the devil. They have allegiance to the Pope. Therefore, we've got to stop them.
The Know-Nothing Party and Americanism and... they actually burned down convents and places like that in this period of time. It's not many people know that,
but they were good economists, and they realized that if you make people pay twice for education, once for private education and once through taxes for public education of other people's children, then there'll be less allegiance to their evil, Catholic schools, private schools.
Right.
And they didn't have enough power to ban them outright. If they could have, I think they would have. But all they could do is say, well, we'll have public education, and we'll promote, allegiance to the state or what have you. No, I'm a bitter opponent of public education, not only because it's anti-Catholic, but because it's coercive. Okay. What we're doing is forcing you to pay money to educate your kids. Suppose you don't have kids. Why should you be paying for the education of other people's children?
Any entrepreneur will benefit from a better educated public, don't you think? If you're looking for workers, having to train them yourself versus having them already trained, where they can read and write. I don't think it's natural for human beings to seek reading and writing. I've read The Virtue of Selfishness, and that was my main problem with it. Is that there seems to be no admission that entrepreneurs can benefit by government intervention, and education seems to be the best case of that in my mind.
Well, you're quite right. Employers will benefit from an educated public, but they'll also benefit from a clothed public, from a fed public. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that we have to socialize food and clothing and everything else? I mean, we all benefit from everything. We all benefit from the fact that we took showers or baths this morning. Do we have to have socialist soap also? I mean, that's just a recipe for total socialism. Just because you benefit from something doesn't mean that coercion is justified. What I'm doing is I'm coming to you with a point of a gun. I'm saying, give me money and I'm going to educate his kids. Where do you justify theft? Just because a majority favors it? Just because we vote for it? Look, Hitler came into power under a democratic election. That doesn't mean that everything that Hitler did was justified, and yet that's the thinking that is behind the support of public education.
I just see... For many businessmen, the profits that they have made are by virtue of the infrastructure that has been established, and that infrastructure needs to be paid for. And perhaps the people who are profiting from it are not paying enough of their profit in return for the infrastructure that has been built.
I would say that they're benefiting in spite of the infrastructure, not because of the infrastructure. Because if we didn't have public infrastructure, we'd have private infrastructure.
We would have interstate highways, you think?
We'd have private highways, yes. Originally, all highways were private. The first highways in this country in the 1700s were all private. They were
toll roads.
Toll roads, yeah.
Well,
toll roads.
There were wagon ruts before there were that. I mean,
right. But they were all look. 40,000 people. My latest book is on privatizing highways. So, by coincidence, 40,000 people a year die in these bloody highways. They're like death traps. You see, the benefit of private versus public is. Look, we have pretty good pens and wristwatches and pieces of paper. And pizza. Why pretty good? Well, whenever somebody doesn't do a good pen or a good pizza, they lose money. If they do it, make mistakes too much, they go broke. So the people who remain are pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. In the public sector, if you screw up, do you lose money? No. Do you go broke? No. Look, we still have FEMA. One of my favorite bumper stickers around here is FEMA happens. Well, look, FEMA screwed up royally. The Army Corps of Engineers screwed up royally. So what do? We give them more money. No, when a private company screws up, what they do is they lose money and they go broke, and the remainder is pretty good. So that's why private is always more efficient than public. Look, we make profits despite the public infrastructure. If we didn't have public infrastructure, we'd have private infrastructure, and private infrastructure is more efficient. This is one of the messages of Ayn Rand.
Well, Dave, you really got him worked up on that subject. But before this show ends, I would like to get back to your classes and the fact that you require your students to read Atlas Shrugged. These are students in the Catholic University. How do they respond and react to that book?
Oh, they say it's 1,100 pages. Do I really have to read it? But it goes very quickly. I mean, as I said, I read the whole thing in 2 days the first time I read it.
After they've read the book, do they get the message of? Because I think her message is that individual rights, that individuals should not be controlled or hampered by governments.
And I think that's very consistent with the original Jesuit insight. The original Jesuits in the School of Salamanca with a bunch of Dominicans and Jesuits in 1540 were very free enterprise, laissez-faire types of people. So the Atlas Shrugged is very compatible with the initial views of the Jesuits. The modern Jesuits, there are very few that believe this.
Let me ask you this, though. What is the role, as far as Rand is concerned, not necessarily if you differ, then what is the proper role of government at all? What do we have governments for other than needing evil?
Zero.
Nothing. So you think we'd be completely better off without any government whatsoever?
Absolutely.
Post office, roads,
everything.
Military, which
Defense,
I might agree to.
Internal revenue, sir?
Internal revenue.
Well, there'd be no internal revenue. You go buy pizza, you pay for the pizza. Everything would be private because the essence of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle. Non-aggression principle means you keep your mitts to yourself and you don't grab other people's bodies or their property. Well, the government does two things. First of all, it taxes, and secondly, it forbids competition. And thirdly, it disallows secession. We try to secede, us Southerners, in 1861. And
now you're a Southerner, huh?
Yes. Well, I'm from South Brooklyn, so I'm...
Well, what about, are you saying that we should also have private armies?
Private armies, police forces, courts, yes, everything should be private because...
Well, that's what they have in Iraq, private armies.
Oh, I wouldn't say... I think they have governmental armies because they initiate violence against innocent people like governments do. Private cops don't do that. Look, where would you rather meet me tonight? In the middle of Audubon Park at 3 in the morning or in Disney World? Obviously, Disney World is very safe there because if somebody gets murdered or raped in Disney World, they're going to lose tons of money. Suppose somebody gets raped out or murdered in Audubon Park. Who loses money? Who goes broke? No one does. No one in a position to fix anything.
Well, there would be no Audubon Park if it wasn't private.
Oh, there would be private parks. What about Disney World? That's a private park. Of course there'd be private parks.
I prefer Audubon Park with the crime to Disney World. I've been to Disney World.
Look, there would be private parks with greenery under the free enterprise system. It's silly to think that you need the government to have parks.
But the whole motivation here would be, I understand that, I would agree with that. The whole motivation here would be capital reward to the people that own the parks. And this would be a whole nation of McDonald's and Walmarts and Disney World there'd be no culture.
Mozart, and even Brahms, your buddy Brahms, were private.
Not my buddy Brahms, Wagner.
Sorry, your buddy Wagner. I know you and he were boyhood friends.
We were boyhood friends,
and they were all private people. Don't say there's no culture. Only government is culture. You need government to have culture. This is erroneous.
I'm making an obviously extreme argument here. To get the polarity out of it.
But you think
you're an absolutist as far as you would be a philosophical anarchist here.
Yeah, certainly. Okay. Yeah.
Dr. Block, we've only got a few minutes left, and I did notice that you were a co-author of an article called Katrina and the Future of New Orleans. Could you take a minute or two and tell us what that's all about?
Yes. What I'm advocating is that we privatize the Army Corps of Engineers. We get rid of FEMA. We have a free tax zone. We legalize drugs. You see, one of the big problems that we have really two big problems. When will the next Katrina hit? And for that, we need a better Army Corps of Engineers, and also the murder rate. The murder rate is horrendous. The murder rate, I think, is 60-70% dominated by illegal drugs. drugs. If we legalize drugs, heroin, marijuana, cocaine, you name it, we legalize it, we would take all the profits out of this instead of having a gigantic price for this and therefore being profits in buying and selling it, and also the users of it have to commit crimes in order to feed their habits. Look, we had a prohibition of alcohol. It didn't work. Right. What's the difference between alcohol and marijuana?
So you want free drug zones rather than drug-free zones.
Right, that's a good way to put it. I'm going to use that next
month. Yours.
Thank you.
Well, listen, I don't know how much the secular humanists might agree with everything that we've heard from you today.
We don't agree with anything.
And I suspect that there's a lot more that you would like to talk to us about, which we will have to see what we can do about that. But at least to the extent that we think that government should stay out of our affairs, and government should stay out of religion should stay out of government, and both of those things should allow us to live our lives as we have chosen to live them. So there have to be some areas of agreement between our secular humanists and what you're saying, even though, from what I hear from Dave and Lanny, there are also areas where we might disagree. What would you pinpoint as, we've got about 1 minute left, as the biggest area of agreement between, the Ayn Rand position and we secular humanists?
Well, I'm not an expert in secular humanism, but my understanding is that it's pro-people, pro-human welfare, and I think that free enterprise and capitalism are the best way to promote economic prosperity, and we all want economic prosperity. Socialism doesn't work. Socialism is not only per se wrong, non-virtuous, but it also is very inefficient. People starve under socialism. We don't want starvation, so I think there's a lot of overlap between secular humanists on the one hand and libertarians or objectivists on the other hand.
Well, that's very good, and I just want to thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll have to get together with you again sometime. Dave and Lanny, as usual, thanks for being here, and I think our folks need to know that Dave and Lanny are members of our board of directors. We thank you for watching our show. We hope we will see you again in the very near future.